Atlanta Braves Holdings just announced their first quarter earnings and revenue was up. Let's talk about why that matters to you. Yes, welcome on into Braves Today, a production of the Belief Podcast Network and presented to you by FanDuel. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby, author of the Braves Today newsletter over at BravesToday.com. Atlanta Braves Holdings, the parent company of the baseball team, announced their quarter one financials this morning. I had a chance to not only get that press release from the investor relations team, but sit in on the teleconference that they hold for investors, analysts, to discuss the results and answer questions. And so let's talk about that real quick. A couple reminders here. One, the time frame that we're talking about, the first quarter of 2026, January through March of 2026. When I talk about an increase of X percent, that is that is in comparison to the same 3-month period in 2025. And that's going to cause some problems in just a minute, and we'll get to that, because of the nature of Atlanta's business and how it works. But when we talk about Atlanta Braves Holdings, and reminder here, they are split up into really kind of two business units. There is baseball, which is the Atlanta Braves, the team. And then there is mixed use development, which is the Battery Atlanta. The stuff that happens in Truist Park falls under baseball. The stuff that happens in the Battery and around the Battery falls under mixed-use development, okay? So total revenue was up 53% from the previous quarter. Again, first quarter of 2025 to first quarter of 2026. So that 53% increase is $72 million. Now, I mentioned it's going to cause some issues with the comparison, and it's because with the Braves specifically, their financials are heavily influenced by seasonality, meaning they make the bulk of their money around the baseball schedule. So whenever you're trying to compare quarter to quarter results, the very first thing you have to ask is, how many baseball games did they play in each quarter? And this is where it gets a little bit funny, right? Baseball revenue was up 60% quarter one of 2026 over quarter one of 2025. The issue is because unlike seemingly every year where the Braves open on the road, they opened at home this time. So in the month of March, in quarter one, the Braves had 5 home games. Last year, they had 0. So that does influence the numbers, which means quarter 2 and quarter 3 are probably maybe 2, probably 3, but either way, they're going to together have less home games than the team had in those quarters last year. You see how this gets a little bit funny to try and compare. It's not an even comparison because one had home games and one did not. But still, 60% increase, so that's fine. Mixed-use development income, which is not as influenced by the seasonality because people are always coming to the Battery. There is a component here, but it was up 41% from that same period last year. And the big thing here on this one is I feel better about the mixed-use development increase for 2 reasons. One, 1.4 million people came to the Battery in the first quarter of the year. And the Braves played 5 baseball games. But 2, some of the additional events in the Battery that the Braves had in the first quarter of 2025, they didn't have this year in the same quarter. The Savannah Bananas. More than 100,000 people came to Truist Park for the 3-game series the Bananas just played. It was in May. Last year, that series was in quarter 1. So The Battery had an increase of 41% in revenue and brought in 1.4 million people, and they didn't have everybody who came for the Bananas. They've had, I don't remember exactly when the Eagles concert was. I feel like the Eagles concert was not in March. So that's another event that was not in that quarter that's going to add into the quarter two financials. And for context here, last year they had 380 events on the campus, as they call it. They call it the campus. They had 95 games in Truist Park, because that's not just Braves games. That's also local college games like Georgia Tech playing. That is the Bananas, all that kind of stuff. They had 144 events last year in the Battery Atlanta, another 147 at the Coca-Cola Roxy. So it's important to know that, yes, they had a bunch of extra stuff because of the All-Star game, but they still absolutely could beat last year's number for the Battery without the All-Star game. When you look at the fact that quarter one, they beat quarter one of last year without the Bananas, although they did get a couple Braves games in there. So, just kind of interesting to note that. They are seeing increased traffic, again, 1.4 million people. They're also seeing more demand for spaces. They're opening some new restaurants. The Truist Securities building is online, and I believe there's a restaurant coming in there. And then they ended they went from low 80s on the occupancy of Pennant Park when they got it to somewhere around 90% now. So they brought in more tenants for that, right? Office spaces. And then they've just closed like 50,000 square feet in new leases to add to the Battery. And that's something where they are working on more for the Battery. They want to expand parking. They want to improve flow. They're working on a pedestrian bridge that will go from the Battery to the Henry project. But because of all of the visitors, because of all of the traffic and everything, the investments they've put into the space, the big takeaway here is they're able to get rent premiums in everything in the Battery. The retail space, the hotel stuff. And so their rates, their rental rates, their lease rates are above the market for that type of area, that suburban type of area, as well as the surrounding space around the Battery. They get a premium there. And every time they sign a new lease, they're able to push that premium. So as the older tenants leave and newer tenants come in, they're getting more. That's how this revenue keeps growing. They're adding, they're filling the existing spaces, and they're getting better rents when they do it. And again, this matters because all of the money they make from the Battery, the Braves keep it. They do not have to share any of that money with Major League Baseball. And that is why every single new stadium build that is proposed, every single plan, everything includes a component just like the Battery, a mixed-use development component. For those of you who are interested in this sort of thing, I did a podcast last week with Stephen Godfrey. He hosts a podcast called Phantom Island, and we spent about an hour, or the episode's about an hour. It's audio only in your podcast feeds under Phantom Island, where we talked about the development of the Battery Atlanta and how it's become this model for all new sports renovations, new builds, everything. So you can go find that podcast. It is a free episode. Again, the podcast is called Phantom Island, presented by Home Field. It was hosted by Stephen Godfrey. I was the guest, and we talked about that for, again, it was close to an hour episode. So go check that out. The end result of all of this stuff, all of the increased baseball revenue, the increased mixed-use development revenue in quarter one, and all of that ends up being that their OIBDA, which is operating income before some of the extra charges, depreciation, amortization, other on-paper charges that are used to discuss the life of assets and things like that, right? If you have a dollar figure on your balance sheet for depreciation, that is not money that you are actively spending right there. So OIBDA, Operating income before depreciation and amortization kind of just looks at the actual cash spending. That measure shows that they improved by 39%. Now it's still negative. They're still losing money in quarter one. And some of that is baseball operating costs were up. And a lot of this is because you're not earning the money from playing the baseball, but you had to pay money to get ready to play the baseball. Another big component of this is BravesVision. And both Terry McGurk and Derek Schiller spent quite a bit of time discussing BravesVision. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at IQ Bar, our exclusive snack, hydration, and coffee sponsor. IQ Bar protein bars, IQ Mix hydration mixes, and IQ Joe mushroom coffees are the delicious low-sugar brain and body fuel you need to win your day. The Ultimate Sampler Pack is a great way to try all of their products and flavors. You get 9 IQ bars, 8 IQ Mix sticks, and 4 IQ Joe sticks. All IQ Bar products are clean label certified, entirely free from gluten, dairy, soy, GMOs, and artificial ingredients. With over 20,000 5-star reviews and counting, more people than ever are fueling their busy lifestyles with IQ Bar. And the great news is their Ultimate Sampler Pack includes all 3 products, and right now you can get 20% off of all IQ Bar products, including the Ultimate Sampler Pack, plus free shipping. To get that 20% off, text MLB to 64,000. That's MLB to 64000. That's MLB to 64,000. Messages and data rates may apply. See terms for details. We got a lot of updates on BravesVision. What we didn't get was a lot of concrete numbers, but there's a reason here. So, for those who don't know exactly how this works, Main Street Sports Group, which held the broadcasting rights, it was Bally, the channel was Bally Sports and it was FanDuel Sports. The way that they paid the Atlanta Braves was in 9 equal monthly installments in the first 3 quarters of the year. So you had predictable broadcast revenue income. Like, you knew where it was coming from and you knew when you were going to get it. BravesVision doesn't work like that. BravesVision, the Braves are collecting themselves. And typically in advertising, this is something that they confirmed in the call, they're paying in arrears. They're paying after the ad has run. If you run an ad in the month of April, you collect that money in May. So they hadn't really collected almost anything by the time these financials were baked at the end of March. So there is not a ton of of BravesVision money to report. But their early indications, and they did say that they're discussing how best to do this, how best to report these, because the cash flow is going to look weird, because they don't have those reliable monthly payments that they were getting. I say reliable. That broadcast deal was subject to 2 different bankruptcy proceedings, but they don't have that that somewhat reliable scheduled payment. There you go. And so they're going to figure out how to report it. But they did say all of their early indications are pointing towards BravesVision should make them more money than that TV deal did. And it's important to remember that TV deal was considered one of, if not the worst in baseball. The first time of the 2 times that broadcast deal was involved in the bankruptcy proceedings, the company that held it at the time, when they went to bankruptcy, when they filed for bankruptcy, they told the court they wanted to drop every single NBA, NHL, and MLB deal that they had signed that was existing except for this one. They made so much money off of this one. They wanted everybody else to give up some money to end the deal together or whatever. They wanted to keep this one. The Atlanta Braves Holdings, I always try to make sure I'm clarifying here. Atlanta Braves Holdings said on the call, they expect, even in year 1, they will end with more money from BravesVision than they got from the deal and the scheduled payments last year. And some of what helps, there was a question about this, and I'm trying to, I have it, I did a live thread on Twitter as this was going. I think it was Barton Crockett of Rosenblatt, who's my favorite questioner always on these. He has good questions. One of the questions he asked, he had 3 today. One of the questions he asked was about the size of the TV market and the reach of the TV market. And there was some really interesting stuff here. Thing number 1 that came out of the answer, the distributors for BravesVision are largely the exact same ones that Main Street had, which means the growth potential there comes from the fact that Main Street was collecting more money for the Braves broadcasts than they were paying the Braves. That is how these work, right? But the Braves have signed up, for the most part, all of the same broadcast outlets that had FanDuel Sports Network. And so the growth potential comes from getting the entire portion of that carriage deal, as well as the direct-to-consumer sales. And this was interesting. Barton asked a follow-up about how much do you have direct-to-consumer versus how much do you have in the regular cable distribution? And did that change when you went from Main Street Sports Group to BravesVision? The Braves did not know with an exact figure how many direct-to-consumer streams were sold by Main Street Sports Group. That was the amount of signups, the exact figures were not shared with them, because last year was the first year you had the ability to pay and stream it, but Main Street Sports Group sold that. The Braves didn't sell that. They did not know how many. They did say they are, quote, very happy with the amount of signups for Braves.tv. And that is something Braves.tv is shared with the league. They are using the league's distribution system, MLB.tv. And so because of that, and we don't know the percentage, but there is an amount of a Braves.tv sign up that is shared with the league. But they are still happy with the raw numbers that are going here. Another BravesVision question, shout out to David Joyce of Seaport Research Partners. He asked about the investments, the capital investments, money that they had to spend to launch BravesVision. And we found out from the answer from Atlanta Braves Holdings that they partnered with Gray Media and Raycom. And so the Braves didn't have to spend a ton of additional money. I would assume this is like equipment and everything. They leveraged their existing partners to have access to all of the cameras and the microphones and all the things that they would need. And then a lot of the expense came in setting up everything, which, by the way, they called this, and I think it was, maybe it was Terry McGurk said this, he called it a Herculean effort. A lot of similar broadcast things like this are done over like a year. The Braves did it in like a month. And they broke BravesVision out into 5 main core units. Production, which is making the broadcast, filming the game, getting CJ mic'd up, Brandon mic'd up, and all that stuff. Distribution, which is getting it to all of the different cable companies and everything to put it out. Advertising, so selling the advertising. Programming, which is the developing the content. And then the direct-to-consumer streaming portion. That's the 5 main units of BravesVision. They partnered with Gray, they partnered with Raycom to work on both of those, and they used some of the internal existing teams with the Braves. I've been told that there were Braves employees who were like helping sell advertising for this and things like that were not doing TV stuff last year. But their team was still here, and so they stepped in, and they're helping with this. Marketing people for Atlanta Braves Holdings stepping in and helping with BravesVision. Little side note if we want it, they are working on developing additional content outside of the pre- and post-game shows. Their focus right now, which they told us it was going to be, is trying to deliver the best game broadcast possible. We've all seen every now and then there's a technical issue, there's a hitch in the stream, or maybe a graphics, not like just little things that are working out the kinks still. It's gotten a lot better, since the start of the season, but there's still some issues that come up. Their focus right now is the best game broadcast they can do. But that programming department is working on additional pre and post, additional content outside of the pregame show and the postgame show. Which, by the way, if you guys want to put Braves Today on BravesVision, I'm not opposed. We can do something like that. We can do our prospect stuff on Saturdays with Gorov or whoever. We can put it on BravesVision. Just tell me, Braves. Y'all have my email address. Call me. Why would I say email address and then say call me? Anyway, just reach out. We can totally work this out. There were a few other things they talked about, including ticket prices. Let's get to that next, right here on Braves Today. All right, so one of the things I noticed at the very top of the call, after some kind words about Bobby Cox and Ted Turner, was Terry McGuirk talked about the team's on-field performance. He talked about how good the Braves have been this year and how this has them set up to potentially deliver a World Series championship. Braves Today sponsor FanDuel, by the way, has Braves' third best odds at plus 1,200 of winning the World Series. That's kind of nice. And the quote from Terry McGuirk, quote, "Our ultimate goal every year is to compete for and win a World Series for our fans. This start puts us in an outstanding position to continue focusing on the playoffs, which is the first step of that journey. But as we kind of know, the money the Braves are earning goes back into the team. They're not showing a profit. Overall operating income, even when they put in amortization, depreciation, all of that stuff, even before they put all that in, the OIBDA is still them losing money. They don't show a profit because they are reinvesting in salaries, reinvesting in the ballpark, and all of that. And there was some interesting talk about those investments as well as the ticket prices. Let's do the ticket prices. No, let's do the investments first because that matters. One of the questioners, I think in this case it was Barton Crockett again, asked about an increase in overall debt for Atlanta Braves holdings. And he's right. The debt, there is more debt on the balance sheet than there was last year. The Atlanta Braves holdings explained that debt, almost all of that debt, is for revenue generating commercial property as part of the mixed use development side, right? Buying Pennant Park. The other projects that they've done. Some of those are financed through debt, but there is an income producing source attached to that debt. It's not bad debt. It's what I'm trying to say. When you have debt that is connected to an asset that earns money, it's less risky than borrowing money for just something you want to do. And so a lot of Atlanta's baseball debt is stadium associated. They're not looking to increase that. They're making payments on that with the goal of eventually getting that done, taken care of. And all of their stadium improvements, which oftentimes come out of cash flow in quarter 3, quarter 4, they're paying in cash. They're not borrowing money to do improvements to the ballpark. So the premium spaces they add in the winter and all of that, that's all funded by the team. They're not borrowing money. They did clarify if they need to borrow money for baseball reasons, they have the ability to do it. There's what's called debt revolvers, which are credit facilities set up through the league where teams can borrow money for different things. I think famously, maybe it was 2 years ago, the Padres had to borrow money to make payroll once. But they have access to all of that. They're not using it. But if they need debt, if they need to get money, they can do it. But all of their debt they're adding is tied to income-producing property. And they're paying for all of those renovations. It's capital expenditures. And the reason they're doing it, this question, and I've missed who it was, I apologize, was about the premiumization, if that's a word, that's what he said. I don't think it's a word. The premiumization of the ticket price. And they admitted, I think it was Derek Schiller, they admitted that in the past, and I'm going to read the quote here, they felt like there was, quote, room for growth on the average ticket price. Meaning they thought that Braves tickets were too cheap on the whole. And so there was some effort, and this is all me now, there was some effort to push the average ticket price a little bit higher. Now, however, their focus is what they're calling, quote, optimizing the premium. They clarified, and they use these exact words, they want to be fan-friendly. They want to have value offered options, I think is what he said, which is a weird way to word that. But they are focusing on the premiums. So a lot of the renovations you've seen in the ballpark have been to add some sort of premium space or add some sort of amenity to attach to a ticket. And the goal is to have a greater percentage of tickets that have an amenity either automatically associated with them or the ability to add it. And a lot of their recent ballpark improvements have been focused on that. In essence, they're saying our base ticket to get in the door is expensive enough already. We're not looking to increase that. What they're looking to do is to find ways where if you're wanting something else, that's some other benefit, something else that's special, we can do an add-on to your ticket, or you can select a different ticket, pay more, and get that extra thing. And honestly, I appreciate the idea of we're not going to push the average ticket price even higher because baseball games are already expensive to go to. Instead, we're going to find ways if you want to pay that price, you can pay that price, that value offering and get in the door. And then if you want some extra stuff, we have those options for you too. I think that's a better way to do it. And I like that they're doing that versus some places you see like Yankee Stadium and everything where every ticket price has gotten pushed to absurd amounts. So I like that they do that. A couple other fun things that came out of this. They were asked about salary caps and floors and their positions on those. And Terry McGurk immediately and just plainly deferred to Rob Manfred. He's like, we're not in a position to discuss that. Like 100%, there's going to be CBA negotiation. Rob Manfred's running that. We're not talking about it. It was just like pretty, you almost never get definitive answers in any of these things to any of these questions. And that was 100% a definitive. We're not talking about this. That's all going to Rob Manfred. They did also say there is a pregame tribute before Tuesday's game for Ted Turner and Bobby Cox. So if you're going to that game, go early, get there early, be in your seat because there's going to be some sort of ceremony before the game, some sort of tribute. I don't know the details. They didn't go into details on the call, but there's going to be something about those two men, those two Atlanta greats before Tuesday's game. All in all, I think the big takeaway here that we need to know about the Braves is my impression from now having listened to a bunch of these every single quarter, the annual one and all of that, my impression here is that they are still finding ways to make money. They are still finding ways to grow revenue, but they are also very aware that the biggest driver of money in the door for the Atlanta Braves is the team being good. They are very, very aware that if this money does not continue to get reinvested in the team, that attendance is going to drop, and that is the strongest leg on this ladder that they're trying to climb. So, having listened to some of their plans, having listened to what they're doing, I like that. I think one, focusing on access for BravesVision was the right move. The distribution has not shrunk from BravesVision, from FanDuel Sports Network to BravesVision. So that's nice. I feel like their focus on we're not taking on additional baseball debt to improve our ballpark. We're paying for that out of pocket. That's a perfectly acceptable use of some of that cash flow. And I don't mind if they run a small on paper loss because they're reinvesting in not only the baseball side, but in the facility. And those investments in the facility bring in more money, which can then be reinvested in the baseball side. It's a cycle that helps. And then they're growing the mixed-use development stuff. And that money is also available for the Braves. That is a supplemental income stream that is still variable with the baseball season, but it's not as sensitive as baseball revenue is. So I honestly have zero complaints about what we're hearing, what we're seeing in the financials about the Braves. And it makes me feel really good about not only being a fan of a team that owns an office park and an outdoor amusement park, as Steven called it on the podcast that we did, but also that they're doing the right things to keep this sustainable going forward. That'll do it for Braves today. We are back tomorrow to preview the Cubs series. So in the meantime, make sure you're subscribed both to the podcast and to BravesToday.com. This article is going to be out in some sort of written version a little bit later today, once I have a chance to actually put this stuff down on paper. And we have a lot of other stuff coming up this week. It was a fun thing about who has the most 10 pitch or less saves in baseball since 2021. I wrote some code to pull from MLB to check every single save that's been recorded in the last 6 seasons, 5+ seasons. And the first name that came up is a Braves player. So we'll talk about that this week. A lot of other stuff coming up. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.